Let's get started with the drums. I've already showed you how I make my kick drum sounds and the claps. Hey guys, today it's another day in the studio and today I'm starting a new track. This is always something that makes a lot of fun, but there's one major problem. I'm working on this vocal track out of the folder with the 10 vocal tracks, so I was able to choose one. I can't share it here on this channel, so for this video I thought about just concentrating on getting a good drum sound and how I compress them, how I root them, what kind of reverb I'm using. This is Geist, my favorite sequencer for drums. I'm adding 4 kicks into 1 bar. This is just a sub kick, so I'm also adding a top kick. I've showed that in another video in more detail. The top is a little bit too loud. Then adding a snare on 2 and 4. Next up I'm adding off hi-hats. This is really typical for house music. It gives it that jacking kind of feel and makes it really groovy. Then I add closed hi-hats on 8s. You can also put them in at 16 to make it even sound more speed up. That's what it would be like with 16th. But that's a bit too fast for my kind of music. So that's a really basic 4-to-the-floor house loop. You can use it for all different kinds of electronic dance music. If you go more into an EDM direction, the samples tend to be harder and more electronic. And for house music and deep house music, you should definitely use more softer samples that are maybe even live recorded. That's also what I'm going for on this track. Next up is EQing all of the elements that I have. This is my EQ for the low kick. I'm cutting away everything at the top. This is the EQ for the top kick. I've cutted everything away beneath 180 Hz. On the clap also only a low cut to get rid of unwanted low frequencies that could muddy up the mix. On the hi-hats I'm cutting away quite a lot. I could cut even more. At this point the sound starts to become thin, so I'm backing off again a little bit. On this particular hi-hat, cut at around 530 was perfect, but you really have to decide it for each and every sample on its own. You have to listen to it, cut into the sound, back off again a little bit. There is not a general rule to cut this and that sound at this frequency, but usually I cut away the low frequencies on everything that doesn't have a low end, just to make the mix a little bit more cleaner. And sometimes samples have still a little bit of microphone rumble from the recording, so just to make sure I'm cutting it away. Next up is adding reverb. I never add reverb to the sub kick, sometimes to the top kick, but in this case I didn't. And then I listen to the snare with the kick and adjust the reverb of the snare. The snare has always its own reverb that is a little bit longer than the rest of the drums. That's the dry snare. And now with the reverb. The hi-hats get their own bus. In my case it's always bus number 4, where I have a smaller reverb that just gives a little bit of ambience. It's a reverb that you almost can't hear, but if it's missing you definitely hear that it's too dry. Now that I have the solid drum groove, I will start taking care of the other elements. I've already a distorted piano and a sub bass. I have also the vocals that I can't play. And I think I will add a pad and probably the first guitar bits today and get back later to working on the finer details of the drums when I have the bigger picture of the entire track. halfway through with the track and I have a very rare studio guest. His name is Julian, a very good and old friend. And what is really interesting, his dad is also a music producer for how many years now?
His whole life, I think.
Yes. And he also had a kind of big hit, like at least for Germany. Number 10, 15, 20, what was it?
Oh, in the 80s his
yes,
own track?
Yes.
Yeah, it was in the charts. I don't know the right place.
And he's now running still, I'd say, one of 5 of the biggest studios here in the city.
I won't
Probably.
say that.
No, it's a nice studio. I've been there a couple of times. The next time I'm there, I will take you with me. And now we're having lunch. I'm hungry. Let's go.
Me too.
Lunchtime. Hi. Vielleicht kriegen wir auch schon Gin Tonic.
So, ne? Das ist echt schmeckt.
Danke. Looks good. And yours as well. So how was the lunch?
Perfect. Overwhelming.
Yeah, mine was also really good. Now on our way back to the studio. Zum Beispiel das Chaos vor dieser Tür nehme ich nicht auf. Julian is testing my studio couch. And from 1 to 10, how good is it?
9.5.
I'm actually never using it. So the vocal track that I'm working on today, I can't play you, but Julian gets to listen to it. He's the very first one. So. And do you like the new vocals?
Yeah, it's the best track I've ever heard.
Perfect. Thanks for saying that. Bye. Nice seeing you. It was a lot of fun hanging out with him. I haven't seen him in a long time. We went even together to Ibiza a couple of years ago. This was, yeah, let's just say it was crazy. That's a whole nother story. Now let's get back to working on the track. I want to proceed so far that I can show you the details that I'm doing to the drums. It's now almost 6. I've advanced enough with the track. I've now the vocals, the piano, an arpeggiator, a pad, strings, additional vocals, a first guitar sound that I'm not really satisfied with at the moment, and a sub bass. So all of that I can't show you, so I will just solo the drums and show you how I get them to sound a bit more crunchy and tighter and all together by using parallel compression. That's the glue compressor. These are my settings for parallel compression. It's really heavily compressed. If I turn the mix all the way to wet and play it to you, it sounds really squashed and weird. And if I bypass it, it sounds as it did before. Again, the heavily compressed version. And now I'm just using this mix knob to mix in maybe 5 to 8% of this really heavily compressed sound. So that's a nice little trick that I'm using to get a compressed sounding sound without really compressing it really hard, so that it still has its dynamics. This doesn't change your drum sound a whole lot, so this is really something quite detailed. You need to have a drum loop that is already working, and then you can add the parallel compression. But be careful, it changes the sound. Most of the time the high frequencies get pushed by quite a lot if you use parallel compression. So I've always also an EQ right after the parallel compression to bring them down a bit again. You might also lose a little bit of bass, but you can also adjust it with the EQ or just turn the sub kick up by maybe a dB or 1.5 dBs. By the way, if you want to listen to the secret track, I will share it on Snapchat. That shouldn't be a problem. I got pretty far with it, but this is no surprise. I got here 7 in the morning and now it's 10:30, it's dark outside. And it's raining again. I don't intend to complain, I just love being in the studio. The only downside is the really bad tram connection at this time around, so I'm having no other option walking through the rain. That's a nice way to end the day, so see you tomorrow. Wow, das war knapp.